Welcome to Cheating Story Tales. This video narrates an inspirational story describing the struggles and determination of an individual. The person faces tough situations but achieves success through hard work, patience, and self-confidence. The story teaches us never to give up and to stay dedicated to our goals, no matter how challenging the circumstances may be. So let's start the video and understand the story. Disappearing without a trace is a serious and difficult step. Would you have been able to do that as the hero of today's story, or would you have done it differently? Write your opinion on this in the comments, and we'll get started. Marriage had always seemed like a stable promise to me. My wife Emily and I had built a life together that felt as solid as the brick home we'd worked years to afford. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but I thought we'd weathered enough storms to have earned the right to some peace. That illusion shattered on a crisp Friday night in October. Emily had always been social, much more than me. She thrived on connections, dinners with friends, and girls' nights out. I trusted her implicitly, or at least I thought I did. So when she mentioned a big night out with her closest girlfriends, I barely blinked. "Don't wait up for me, babe," she said with a playful wink. "We're going all out tonight." I smiled back, more focused on the game on TV than her plans. "Have fun, just don't drink too much," I said. As the hours ticked by, I stayed in my usual Friday night groove, some light cleaning, a few beers, and watching highlights of the week's sports. Around midnight, I started to feel a twinge of unease. Emily hadn't texted once, not even her usual check-in to let me know things were going well. By 1:30 a.m., I was wide awake, staring at my phone. Then, just after 2 a.m., the front door creaked open. I stood in the living room, frozen. Emily staggered inside, her heels dangling from one hand and her purse barely hanging on her shoulder. Her hair was a mess, her lipstick smeared, and her cheeks flushed with the telltale signs of too much alcohol. "Hey," she slurred, collapsing onto the couch. "Emily, are you okay?" I asked, walking over to her. She mumbled something incoherent and waved her hand dismissively. That's when I noticed it. She wasn't wearing any underwear. The realization hit me like a brick. Her short black dress, now wrinkled and slightly askew, offered no explanation but begged for questions. My heart raced as a sickening sense of dread took over. "Where are your underwear?" I asked, trying to sound calm despite the panic rising in my throat. She blinked lazily at me, her face blank. "What?" "You're not wearing any," I repeated, my voice harder now. Emily's drunken brain seemed to take a moment to process the words. Then she giggled, a soft, nervous laugh that did nothing to ease my concerns. "Oh, must have lost them, maybe at the club." Her response was like a slap to the face. The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. "Emily, are you serious? How do you just lose your underwear?" She waved me off again, muttering something about dancing too hard and having too much fun, but I wasn't buying it. Every fiber of my being screamed that something wasn't right. As she stumbled off to bed, leaving a faint trail of perfume and alcohol in her wake, I sat down on the couch, my head in my hands. My mind raced through 1,000 possibilities, none of them good. Had she been with someone else? Was she lying to me? I didn't sleep that night. I stayed on the couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the fractured trust that had held our marriage together. The next morning, Emily woke up hungover and irritable, brushing off my questions with curt replies. But I couldn't let it go. Something inside me had shifted, a dark and growing suspicion that refused to be ignored. Over breakfast, I asked again, "Emily, what really happened last night?" She sighed dramatically, rubbing her temples. "God, not this again. I told you we were out dancing and I got a little too drunk. That's all." "Then why were you missing your underwear?" Her face turned red, not with embarrassment, but with anger. "Why are you making such a big deal out of this? It's just underwear."
It wasn't just underwear. It was the trust, the loyalty, the commitment we'd promised each other. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't dealing with the Emily I thought I knew. I didn't argue further. Instead, I let the conversation die and resolved to find out the truth for myself. That night was the turning point, the moment I realized my marriage wasn't what I thought it was. I didn't know yet how deep the betrayal ran, but one thing was certain: I wasn't going to let it slide. The gnawing suspicion wouldn't let me rest. Every time I tried to push it aside, I was haunted by flashes of that night. Emily's slurred excuses, her missing underwear, and her cavalier dismissal of my questions. Something wasn't adding up, and deep down I knew I couldn't ignore it. The next morning I put on a mask of normalcy. Emily acted as if nothing had happened, flitting around the house, sipping coffee, and scrolling through her phone like it was just another lazy Saturday. Her nonchalance only fueled my resolve. I needed proof, something concrete to either confirm my fears or put them to rest. When Emily left the house for an errand, I seized the opportunity. I started with her phone, the most obvious place to hide secrets in this digital age. She rarely left it unattended, but she carelessly left it on the kitchen counter. My heart raced as I picked it up. I knew her passcode. It was my birthday, a fact that now felt bitterly ironic. Unlocking her phone, I went straight to her messaging apps. Most of the conversations were mundane, filled with harmless chatter about work and plans with her girlfriends. But then I found a thread buried deeper in her texts. It was a name I didn't recognize: Jake. My stomach dropped as I opened the conversation. The messages were vague at first, playful banter about meeting up and inside jokes I didn't understand. But as I scrolled further, they became unmistakably flirtatious. My blood ran cold when I stumbled upon the text from the night of her girls' party. Jake: last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. Emily: your trouble. Jake: you left something behind, by the way. Might have to come get it. Emily: keep it safe for me, LOL. The room spun as I read the words. I didn't need a translator to know what something she'd left behind. My hand shook as I closed the app and set the phone back exactly where I'd found it. My heart ached with betrayal, but my mind went into overdrive. I wasn't just going to confront her. I needed a plan. Confrontation wouldn't fix this. If anything, it would give her a chance to lie, twist the truth, or manipulate the situation. No, I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done. I started by gathering more evidence. Over the next few days, I kept my composure, playing the role of the oblivious husband while quietly digging deeper. I scoured her social media accounts, looking for patterns or inconsistencies. I even checked our joint bank statements and saw a charge for a hotel room on the same night as her girls' party. That was the final nail in the coffin. I thought about confronting Jake, but something held me back. Why should he get any satisfaction from knowing I was affected? He was just a symptom of the deeper problem. Emily was the one who betrayed me, the woman I'd loved and trusted above all else. The worst part wasn't even the cheating itself. It was her blatant disregard for me, the way she'd come home that night and treated me like I was some clueless fool. That realization hardened something inside me. That week I started preparing for the next phase. I knew confrontation alone wouldn't be enough. I wanted her to feel what I felt: confusion, loss, and despair. So I began crafting my exit strategy methodically and with precision. First, I withdrew money from our joint savings account, transferring it to a separate account she didn't know existed. I left enough behind to keep up appearances, but I knew the financial cushion I was building would be crucial later. Next, I started packing my belongings, a little at a time. I didn't want to arouse suspicion, so I stashed my things in the trunk of my car bit by bit: clothes, personal items, and anything I considered irreplaceable. All of it quietly disappeared from the house. Finally, I began securing the paperwork for my departure. I researched rental properties in another city and requested time off work under the guise of needing a mental health break. By the end of the week, I'd signed a lease for a small apartment 2 states away. Emily remained oblivious through it all, wrapped up in her own world. She started going out more frequently, sometimes not even bothering to tell me. Where she was going, I stopped asking, knowing that my questions wouldn't yield honest answers. One night, as she sat across the table scrolling through her phone, I finally broke the silence. "Emily, do you love me?" I asked, my voice calm but deliberate. She glanced up, startled by the question. What? Of course I do. Why would you even ask that? No reason, I said with a tight smile. Just wondering. She returned to her phone, brushing off my question like it was nothing, but that brief exchange told me everything I needed to know. She didn't care, not really, and soon she'd realize just how much she had taken me for granted. As I went to bed that night, I felt no more doubt, no hesitation. The truth was out in the open, at least for me. My next steps were clear. I would leave without a trace, and she would wake up to the emptiness she had created. The countdown had begun. Leaving someone you've shared a life with isn't easy, no matter how much they've hurt you. The logistics alone were daunting, but the emotional weight was heavier still. Emily had been in my world for years, and even though I knew she had shattered my trust beyond repair, part of me still mourned the life we had built together. But every time I felt the ache of what I was about to do, I thought back to that night, her drunken giggle, the text messages, and a blatant betrayal. It still stole my resolve. I spent the next week finalizing my escape. I knew the key to disappearing without a trace was thorough preparation. Emily was smart, and if I left any loose ends, she'd find a way to track me down or, worse, twist a narrative to make me the villain first. I made sure all my financial bases were covered. Our joint accounts were dwindling as I quietly siphoned off money, transferring it into my own separate account. I also cashed out a portion to keep on hand. Emily might freeze the account out of spite once she realized I was gone. I paid off all my personal credit cards and canceled any memberships tied to our shared address. I even took the extra step of changing my mailing address to a P.O. box in the city where I planned to start over. Next, I severed ties with anything that could lead her to me. I quit my job citing a personal emergency. My boss was sympathetic, and I left on good terms, knowing I might need a reference in the future. I also deleted my social media accounts, a drastic but necessary step to ensure Emily couldn't trace me. One night, as Emily was out again, no doubt with her friends or worse, I began clearing out the house. I focused on the things that mattered most: family heirlooms, sentimental items, and anything that would be too painful to leave behind. I didn't bother with furniture or decor. Those were just material things, easily replaced. I left behind our wedding album. The thought of taking it felt like poison in my veins. What was the point? Those photos were lies now, snapshots of a life that had never truly existed. By the end of the night, my car was packed, and the house felt emptier, both literally and emotionally. The hardest part was saying goodbye to people who didn't even know they were losing me. My parents lived out of state, so I called them under the guise of needing a fresh start. They were supportive, as always, and I promised to visit soon. As for mutual friends, I kept my plans vague, taking some time for myself, I'd say, brushing off their questions. The fewer people who knew the truth, the safer my plan would be. I also left a letter for Emily, not out of sentimentality, but for closure. It wasn't long or overly emotional, just a few lines explaining that I knew about her betrayal and that I couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies. I didn't include any specifics or address her by name. I wanted her to sit with the ambiguity, to question herself as much as I questioned her. The final night came quickly. Emily was home, curled up on the couch with her phone. She'd barely acknowledged me all evening, engrossed in whatever drama was playing out on her screen. I watched her for a moment, memorizing the details, the way her hair fell over her shoulder, the small furrow in her brow as she scrolled. For a brief, fleeting second, I almost felt regret. But then I remembered Jake, the hotel charge, the texts. No, I couldn't stay. At 4 a.m. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her. My bags were already in the car, my escape meticulously planned. The house was eerily quiet as I walked through it one last time, taking in memories that now felt like ghosts. Before leaving, I placed the letter on the kitchen counter, weighed down by her favorite coffee mug. It felt poetic in a way, her betrayal exposed, delivered with the same casual disregard she'd shown me. I stepped outside, the cold air biting into my face. The sunrise was just beginning to paint the horizon as I started the car and drove away. I didn't look back. By the time Emily woke up, I was miles away, crossing the state line. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages, but I ignored them. I knew she'd read the letter by now, and the panic in her texts confirmed it. "Emily, where are you? What's going on? Emily, we need to talk. Please come. Home. Emily, what do you mean you're leaving? Is this a joke?" Her desperation was palpable, but I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just a hollow sense of vindication. She'd made her choices, and now she'd have to live with them. I arrived in my new city by midday, my belongings crammed into a tiny apartment I'd rented under a pseudonym. The space was sparse and unfamiliar, but it felt like freedom. That night, as I lay on the bare mattress, I thought about Emily. Was she crying? Furious? Trying to spin the story to her friends? It didn't matter. For the first time in years, her emotions weren't my responsibility. The house was unnervingly silent when Emily woke up the next morning. The familiar scent of coffee brewing was missing, as was the sound of me moving around in the kitchen. She rolled over, expecting to see me sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through my phone like I did most mornings. Instead, she was met with an empty space. Still groggy from sleep, she shrugged it off. Maybe I'd left early for work or gone out for a morning run. She shuffled into the kitchen, yawning, but stopped short when she saw the note. The coffee mug sat on top of a single sheet of paper, its presence feeling oddly final. Emily picked up the letter with a frown, her eyes scanning the brief, damning words. "Emily, I know I can't do this anymore. Don't try to find me. I made sure you won't be able to. Goodbye." Her heart dropped. At first, she didn't understand, or perhaps she didn't want to. The ambiguity gnawed at her, forcing her to confront the secrets she'd buried. Panic surged as she checked the rest of the house. The closets were half empty, my shoes missing from the entryway. She ran to the bathroom. My toothbrush, razor, and toiletries were gone. Even the familiar warmth of my scent had vanished. The realization hit her like a freight train. I hadn't just left for work or a jog. I left for good. Emily's first reaction was to call me, but every attempt went straight to voicemail. Text after text was met with silence. Her desperation grew as she checked our joint accounts, only to find them nearly drained. The financial safety net she assumed was there had vanished with me. Her panic turned to anger. She threw her phone onto the couch, pacing the living room. "What the hell is wrong with him?" she muttered to herself. But as the hours ticked by, anger gave way to fear. She called her closest friends, hoping they might know where I'd gone. "He just left," she explained, her voice trembling. No warning, no explanation. What if something happened to him? Her friends tried to console her, but suspicion lingered in their voices. "Are you sure you don't know why he left?" one of them asked. Emily hesitated. "Of course not. I mean, we've been fine, mostly." But they weren't buying it. Over the next few days, Emily's life began to unravel. The gossip started small, just whispers among friends about how I'd walked out, leaving her blindsided. But soon, questions about why I left grew louder. People began piecing things together. Her nights out, the way she flirted openly with strangers, and her increasingly distant behavior toward me. Her closest friend, Claire, confronted her directly. "Emily, is there something you're not telling us?" Claire asked, her tone sharp. "Because it doesn't add up. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy who just leaves without a reason." Emily's defenses crumbled. She broke down in tears, admitting to Claire that she'd been seeing someone else. "It wasn't serious," she sobbed. "It didn't mean anything. I didn't think he'd find out." Claire's disappointment was palpable. "You didn't think he'd find out, Emily. That's not the point. You betrayed him. What did you expect?" Emily's struggles weren't just social, they were financial too. With our joint savings nearly empty, she was left scrambling to cover bills. She'd always relied on me to manage our finances, and now with no backup plan, she was drowning. Her attempts to reach out to Jake, the man she'd risked everything for, only added to her humiliation. He ghosted her entirely, avoiding her calls and ignoring her texts. Emily quickly realized that whatever fleeting excitement she'd felt with him had evaporated, leaving her alone and abandoned. Weeks turned into months, and Emily's life continued its downward spiral. She struggled to maintain her job, her performance slipping under the weight of stress and guilt. Friends she'd once considered close began to distance themselves, their judgment unspoken but undeniable. Even her family grew cold. When she finally confessed the truth to her mother, hoping for sympathy, she was met with disappointment. "You had a good man, Emily," her mother said, shaking her head. "And you threw it all away. I don't know what to tell you." The isolation was suffocating. One night, sitting alone in the dimly lit living room, Emily finally allowed herself to confront the reality of her actions. She replayed every moment in her mind, the lies, the flirting, the selfish choices she'd made. For the first time, she couldn't blame anyone else. The letter I'd left felt heavier now, the finality of my words, the pain I must have felt. It all hit her with crushing clarity. She tried to write me an email, pouring out her apologies, but the words felt hollow. She never sent it, knowing deep down that no apology could undo what she'd done. Emily had always been the life of the party, the one everyone gravitated toward. But now she was a shadow of herself, haunted by regret and the knowledge that she'd lost the one person who truly loved her. The consequences of her betrayal were no longer abstract, they were her reality. And for the first time in her life, Emily realized what it meant to truly lose everything. Her suffering wasn't immediate, but it was lasting. Every day, every quiet moment was a reminder of what she'd thrown away, and deep down she knew she'd never escape it. Starting over wasn't easy, but it was necessary. In the small apartment 2 states away, I began the slow process of rebuilding my life. The space was bare and impersonal, but I welcomed its emptiness. It reflected the clean slate I desperately needed. The first few weeks were a blur of mundane tasks, unpacking boxes, setting up utilities, and scouring job boards. I didn't miss my old life, but there were moments when the weight of what I'd left behind pressed on me. Emily's face would flash in my mind, her laughter, her touch. It hurt, but I reminded myself of the betrayal that had made my decision inevitable. I threw myself into work, taking on a position at a small marketing firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me purpose and structure. The colleagues were friendly enough, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of freedom. Freedom from the constant second-guessing and emotional burden of a broken marriage. But even as I moved forward, a part of me couldn't resist checking in on Emily's life from a distance, through a mutual friend or social media. I saw snippets of her unraveling. Emily looked thinner, her once bright eyes dulled with stress. She'd stopped posting photos of her outings, and her usual flood of selfies had slowed to a trickle. It was clear she was struggling. One particular post from a mutual friend caught my attention. "Hard times build strong people," it read, accompanied by a picture of Emily at a gathering. Her smile was forced, her face lined with exhaustion. I closed the app, my emotions a mix of vindication and pity. She was paying for her choices just as I had hoped, but it didn't feel as satisfying as I thought it would. Months passed, and I began to feel settled in my new life. I started dating casually, nothing serious, just enough to remind myself that not all relationships ended in betrayal. Each new experience chipped away at the bitterness I carried, and I found myself smiling more, laughing more, and enjoying the small moments again. But fate, it seemed, wasn't done with me or with Emily. One crisp autumn day, as I walked into a local cafe, I saw her. Emily. She was seated near the window, staring into a mug of coffee. Her hair was shorter, and she looked thinner than I remembered. I froze, my heart pounding as a wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. She hadn't seen me yet, so I had a choice: slip out quietly or face her. I chose the latter. "Emily?" I said, my voice breaking the silence. Her head snapped up, her eyes widening in shock. For a moment she said nothing, just stared at me as if I were a ghost. David? She finally whispered, her voice barely audible. I sat down across from her without asking. She looked like she'd aged years since I'd last seen her. There was a weariness in her face that hadn't been there before, a vulnerability that surprised me. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice trembling. I could ask you the same thing, I replied. She swallowed hard, her hands wrapping around her mug. I didn't know you were here. I didn't expect to see you. The awkward silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. Why did you leave like that? She finally asked, her voice breaking. I looked her in the eye, my expression unyielding. You know why, Emily. Don't pretend you don't. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she nodded, her composure crumbling. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know that doesn't mean much now, but I'm messed up, and I've paid for it every day since you left. Her confession hung in the air, raw and unvarnished. For a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I trusted you, I said, my voice calm but firm. I gave you everything, and you threw it away like it meant nothing. You don't get to play the victim now. She flinched, but she didn't argue. You're right, she said softly. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I've changed, David. Losing you, it made me realize what I had, what I lost. I know it's too late, but I needed to say it. I studied her, searching for sincerity. She looked broken, but I wasn't sure if it was because she regretted losing me or because she hated the consequences of her actions. After a long pause, I stood up. I appreciate the apology, Emily, but it doesn't change anything. I've moved on, and so should you. She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears. I'll never forgive myself, she said, her voice trembling. That's your burden to bear, I replied, my tone final. Not mine. And with that, I walked out of the cafe, leaving her behind once more. As I stepped into the crisp autumn air, I felt lighter. Closure wasn't about hearing an apology. It was about letting go. Emily was a chapter in my life that had ended, and I was ready to keep writing the rest of my story. Walking out of that cafe should have been the end of it. I thought I'd said everything I needed to say. Emily's remorse, while genuine, didn't change what she'd done or how I felt. I didn't think there was anything left between us. No anger, no love, just a hollow indifference. But life has a way of testing even the most resolute hearts. A week after our unexpected encounter, I received an email from Emily. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. Subject: I know I can't fix this. David, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, and I'm sorry for reaching out. I just need you to know that meeting you again gave me hope, not for us, but for myself. I've been a wreck since you left. I deserved every bit of pain, but it forced me to face who I'd become. You were a good man, and I failed you. I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. Take care of yourself. You deserve the happiness I couldn't give you. Emily. The email stirred something in me, though not the way Emily might have hoped. It wasn't regret or longing. It was anger. Not the fiery rage I'd felt when I first discovered her betrayal, but a colder, sharper anger. She had left me to pick up the pieces of my life without so much as a real apology, and now she thought a few remorseful words could absolve her. I'd moved on, yes, but she hadn't truly faced the consequences of her actions, not yet. Over the next few days, an idea began to form. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about justice. Emily had hurt me in ways she couldn't fully comprehend, and I wanted her to understand the depth of her betrayal. I contacted a mutual friend who'd remained neutral after our separation, someone who still kept in touch with Emily. Through her, I learned that Emily had been trying to rebuild her reputation, even reconciling with some of the friends who had distanced themselves after the fallout of our split. She was painting herself as someone who'd made a mistake but had grown from it. It wasn't entirely untrue, but it also wasn't the whole story. Using an old email address, I reached out to one of Emily's former friends, Claire, the one who had confronted her after I left. Claire was blunt, no nonsense, and I knew she valued honesty. Above all else, Claire, I wrote, you should know the full truth about why I left Emily. If you're still close to her, maybe this will help you understand what really happened. Attached to the email were screenshots of the text between Emily and Jake, the bank statement showing the hotel charge, and a copy of the letter I'd left behind. I wasn't sure what I expected, but within hours, Claire replied, "David, thank you for sharing this. I suspected as much, but seeing the proof, it's heartbreaking. Emily's been trying to spin the story, but she needs to face what she did. I'll make sure the truth gets out." The fallout was swift and far-reaching. Word spread among Emily's social circle, unraveling the narrative she'd carefully constructed. Friends who had started to forgive her pulled away again, unwilling to align themselves with someone who had been so deceitful. Her family, already strained by the truth of her infidelity, grew even colder. Her mother, once her staunchest supporter, reportedly told her, "You need to stop blaming David for leaving. He had every right to." Even her workplace became a source of tension. One of her colleagues, someone who had overheard the gossip, confronted her during a team meeting, asking pointedly if she was the reason her husband left. Emily left the office that day in tears. It wasn't about ruining her life. It was about forcing her to confront the consequences of her actions. For years, she'd avoided accountability, hiding behind half-truths and fleeting remorse. Now she couldn't escape the reality of what she'd done, not just to me, but to herself. I didn't revel in her suffering. If anything, I felt a quiet sense of closure. Emily had hurt me deeply, but I'd rebuilt my life. I'd moved on, and I was happy. The difference was that I'd faced my pain head-on while she tried to bury hers under lies and self-pity. Now, she had no choice but to do the same. Months later, I received one final message from Emily. Subject: "Thank you for making me face it, David. I know you were behind the truth getting out, and as much as it hurt, I needed it. I've spent so long trying to run from my mistakes, but I can't anymore. You were right to leave, and I'll never stop regretting what I did to you, but I'm finally starting to fix myself. Not for you, not for anyone else, but for me. I hope you're happy, truly. You deserve it." Emily, I didn't reply. There was nothing more to say. Emily's life was no longer my concern, and mine was no longer hers. For the first time, I felt free, not just from her, but from the weight of everything we'd been. As I closed the email, I smiled. The final chapter of our story had been written, and now it was time to move on, fully, completely, finally. Thank you for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to hit the like button. It only takes a second, but it means the world to us. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our upcoming videos, and hit the notification bell to be among the first to see it. See you in the next video.